Okay, guys, this is part two, and God bless. What I want to do is just kind of give you a little bit of better picture of what this is all about. This ranch. Um, First off, let's talk about the History Channel. The History Channel is doing a series on it right now as we speak, and this is so. Let's just fast forward to today. So, fast forward to today. This ranch is part of a series on the History Channel. This has exchanged owners several times, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. Okay, but again, the property's in northeastern Utah, and it's approximately 500 acres, and we have all this phenomena that goes on there. Now, the History Channel does a decent job, and it paints a picture of definitely some strange things going on, but it doesn't get into the nitty-gritty details of what really occurred there. It doesn't give it a second coat of paint like it needs, and it doesn't really show much. It talks about the wolf a little bit, right here, that he shot. Talks about some other things going on, but large creatures. It talks about the cattle mutilations here and there, some strange wavelengths, different gamma rays and everything that they're measuring, sightings of human-like creatures, but it doesn't get into the really nitty-gritty of it. But it kind of, gives you a flavor for kind of something's definitely odd here. So here's the episodes right here. And so they're in episode 4. This episode 1 kind of gets an introduction, team of scientists, the caretaker, the security guy, the private investigator. They have this command room set up, and the owner comes out every so often to check on things and see what's going on. So let's talk about who's owned this. So this phenomena goes back all the way between the Utes and the Navajos and how they fought against each other. And the Navajos cursed this area. And it gets into a whole nut roll with shamanism and witchcraft of the Indians and blood being spilt and everything else that went on with that. That's probably the beginning, setting that foundation or whatever for this to be an area to be used. Now, the book talks about a guy named Tom Gorman and his family. Now, Tom Gorman's an alias. They'll talk about him as Sherman in the movie or in this video. I'm not sure what his real name is, if it's Gorman or Sherman, but Gorman, we're just going to go with Gorman as an alias. All right. So the Gormans bought the ranch, and when they bought it, they were going to do cattle ranching. They were going to treat it as a regular ranch. There was some strange stipulations that the sellers had in the contract when they bought the house. No digging and all kinds of weirdness. And they were like, well, whatever, we're going to dig. We're not really worried about it. The home was completely padlocked and had industrial strength locks on the inside. And they thought that was very strange. So they move in and everything's hunky-dory. And they lived there for approximately 2 years. And in those 2 years showcases the far left and the far right of weirdness of what goes on this ranch. And he has people out there. He has investigators, veterinarians, scientists, everything else. So he's had enough, and he sells the ranch. Mr. Gorman sells it. And he sells it to a guy named Bigelow. Now, Bigelow buys the ranch, and he incorporates his own scientific experiment with the help of the seller, Gorman. Kind of like as an ambassador, if you will, to the ranch. Like, hey, help us out, get us set up. What's going on? Can you stay here? Can you leave some cattle for us to, try to see if anything happens, etc. So Gorman ends up with a relationship with Bigelow. However, Gorman at that point signs a disclosure agreement not to talk about anything else that happens on the ranch. With that, pretty much shrouded in secrecy until Bigelow sells the ranch. And he sells the ranch to this guy, who is now owned it since the late 90s, I believe. And for 4 years, he was quiet about anything on the ranch. What he knows, I don't know. He during the 4-year tenure that he was there, remains to be seen as far as what he encountered. But he's out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and seems to be a very wealthy man, bought the ranch and has hired the team right here to study the phenomena. His name, of course, is, if I can find it here, right, it's Brandon Fugel. So Bigelow bought the ranch in 96. He bought it from Gorman, right, who we call Gorman, who lived there for 2 years and kind of held over with Bigelow to help conduct some of the experiments and stuff on the ranch. So then this buyer comes by 3 years ago and he buys it. And he purchases it and he closes it completely, shuts it down. And this guy, Brandon Fugel, is the one that is the owner at this point. So what I want to do now is talk about the experiences, which are really the only ones that are documented and recorded, because everything else was shrouded in secrecy under Bigelow. And I'm going to talk about Mr. Gorman and his family, what they saw happen on the ranch, what occurred with them. Just keep in mind that this is all recorded out of the book, and I'm just going to highlight some things that he talked about. So Sherman and Gorman, I believe, are one and the same, but I might be wrong on that. So I just want to make sure. But that's who the author, and the author of the book is Colm Keller and George Knapp, who they refer to as the owner from that time period prior to Bigelow. So let's talk about some stuff here. So the first thing that grabs your attention is the first chapter, first sentence really is, what is that? And Tom Gorman and his family are out, and they're just basically getting settled in, and they see a wolf come traipsing over this kind of a prairie and come towards them. At first they said it was friendly. It seemed it loped gracefully in a series of turns, and it came towards the whole family, which they thought was bizarre for a wolf. And they said maybe it's somebody's pet, but then as it got closer, it was huge. They couldn't understand what this was and how it could be so big. It smelled of a rain-wet dog, and it was completely reached almost to the chest, and he was 6 feet tall. So it had to be about 5 foot, 4.5 foot tall, standing on all fours. It was massive muscles rippled in the shiny, underneath its shiny silver coat. The eyes were shade of light blue that penetrated the soul. He reached down to pet the beast as it stood there looking at his family, and he felt a tightening in his gut. That's another thing I want to highlight is there are so many experiences of the Holy Spirit cautioning them when they have these encounters. The hair stood on the back of my neck. I felt an urge not to go anywhere. I felt something tell me turn around and go and leave. All those are Holy Spirit signs. So anyway, they're watching this wolf, and they can't really believe what they're saying. And this wolf just walks up to the calf that's in this pen and grabs it by the snout. Now, Tom says, "Go grab my Magnum," is what he tells his son. And he comes back, his son's got the Magnum, and he shoots this wolf with a .357 4 times. There's no bleeding. There's nothing. The wolf doesn't even react. It acts like nothing had happened. I pumped 2 more shots in the wolf's upper abdomen and a 3rd shot, and the wolf slowly, reluctantly released the bleeding calf. The calf scampered out slowly and back into the rope corral, still bleeding as it laid down. It was bleeding heavily from the head. The beast stood 10 feet away and displayed no signs of discomfort. I couldn't believe it. 3 shots from a Magnum could have killed the animal, or at least badly injured it. Not a sound came from the wolf as it gazed unconcerned at me. The chilling, hypnotic blue eyes looked straight at me. I raised my magnum and fired off again. The shot of the animal near the heart. It backed off maybe 30 feet, still facing me and showing no signs of distress. A chill crept over Tom. So he goes on, "Go get my 30-06. Tom tells his son. He goes inside, comes back with 30-06, and let me see here. I felt a cold sweat running down my neck. My wife began to cry. I cursed softly under my breath, shaking my shoulder in disbelief. The wolf would be silent. The wolf should be silent, bleeding in a pile of dead flesh. Instead, it recoiled, backed off maybe 10 feet. It seemed perfectly healthy. I took a deep breath, raised the weapon again, so he's already fired one shot with a 30-06. Aimed at the huge chest cavity. The bullet ripped through the animal. Sizable chunk of flesh detached from the exit wound and laid in the grass. Still, the wolf made no sound. Then, with a last unhurried look and stunned family, the wolf turned slowly and trotted away in the grass. Tears ran down my wife's face, and she hugged my 12-year-old daughter. So they end up tracking this thing. They go inside, they get their stuff, get gathered up, and they can track this thing. Now, Tom, in this book, is a kind of a man's man, hunter. You know, he's capable of taking down coyotes at 500 meters. And they track this thing, and it tracks just dead end. So here's a recount of Ellen, which would be Tom's wife, having another encounter with another wolf shortly after the first. The Gormans tried to ignore the wolf incident. It had been too surreal. One of their neighbors remarked casually to them a few days later on their land that it was home to a herd of large wolves. They believed to hear that the family was not party to some collective delusion. Other people had seen wolves too. A week later, Ellen was driving her gray Chevette back to the homestead. She was coming home in a new job with a local mortgage company. She'd opened the gate to the property and closed it behind her. As she sat in the car, she noticed movement to her left in her peripheral. She gasped. A large wolf. It was huge, and it had silently approached within 30 feet. It was now outside her car window. As she stared into the friendly light blue eyes of the huge animal, she felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. The animal's head stood over the roof of my car. This was no ordinary wolf. It resembled the bulletproof animal that they encountered a few weeks prior. Easily visible in the gathering twilight was another animal, all black. It stood farther away from the car and appeared more reserved. It was large, but not quite as big as the wolf. It looked like a very weird dog, but unlike she'd ever seen. Perhaps an exotic breed created by centuries of mating on the nearby Ute Indian reservation. Maybe one of the Ute neighbors owned this wolf. The dog's head was much too large for its body, but the body was still big. Now thoroughly alarmed, Ellen slammed on the gas pedal and drove away. She made a mental note to complain to the local tribe office in Fort Duchesneas before the following day. When she went to the tribal office, nobody owned wolves around here, she was told. In fact, no wolves have been seen in this part of Utah for 70 years. The last wolf had been shot in 1929. All right, here's a cat mutilation. Over the next few months, another 4 animals just up and disappeared. Tom's stress level had climbed dramatically as a result. By April 1995, the very long winter had ended and the heavy rains had begun. For nearly 2.5 days, rain lashed the ranch, and Tom, as usual, was out tracking his cattle along with his son Tad, who was on horseback. As the rain hammered down with all about 20 feet of visibility, Tad, chasing one of the calves, had been born a couple months prior, past a bawling heifer in the canal. She was trying to climb out the muddy embankment, but it was so slippery that she kept sliding back in the water. The animal was plainly distressed and being very vocal. Tad made a mental note to turn back and rescue the heifer after catching the calf. It took him 20 minutes to catch the panicked animal and return it to the mother, who was waiting patiently in the sheltered grove. Tad returned for the struggling heifer. His heart sank as he saw the animal lying motionless in the canal. In spite of the downpour, the canal was not too deep, so he wondered how on earth the heifer had drowned. He dismounted his horse and jumped down the few feet into the canal, and what he saw made him retch and holler for his dad. The heifer was lying motionless, and her entire rear end had been carved out with what looks like an extremely sharp instrument. Gorman came galloping up to the sound of his son's panicked yells. His face turned ashen when he jumped into the canal with his son. There was no blood in the stream. The cut was flawless. It looked like a 6-inch diameter, perfect circular saw with a sucking device had jammed into the heifer's rear end and effortlessly sucked out the entire insides of the animal without any loss of blood. And it appeared to have happened right in the middle of a heavy rainstorm. Tad swore to his dad that he had seen the animal fully alive and healthy 20 minutes before. Tom and both of them climbed out grimly of the canal in silence. Tom took a rope and tied it around the heifer's hocks, and with the rope tied around the saddle of his horse and hauled the dead animal out of the canal. He felt sick to his stomach. He wondered what to tell Helen so she would not become hysterical. I know Missing 411, David Paulides, talks a lot about storms in these cases of when these storms come around. You have these lights, generally, not in this case, but generally you have all these orbs. And there's a warning from a prophet not too long ago. I'm going to play it at the end of this video, who talks about the orbs, all right, and how these orbs are evil. They're not of God. And these orbs will come around or whatever, and you'll have this phenomena occur. But anyway, I know that bad weather is a lot of times with David Paulides. It'll accompany these missing people that happen out of nowhere, that they just come up and disappear, and then there's bad weather ensues, or some sort of natural disaster or something of that nature. Here's a quick snippet of that example. It says, in 1996, Tom lost 2 more animals to mutilation, and this time he noticed that the carcasses were decaying much slower than they should have, given the humidity and temperature. Each time parts of the cattle had been removed with grim precision of a master surgeon, and each time Tom had seen the puzzling lights flitting around his animals the previous night. He also noticed that the mysterious mutilators seemed to carry out their handiwork under the cover of heavy lightning and thunderstorms. How any technology could reliably function in a heavy thunderstorm was beyond him, but Tom began to wonder if he was a victim of some advanced military skullduggery. Was his ranch the home of site of some military technology concept testing? Gorman was never sure. Here's another one. 3 months later, while riding out an early morning to check on his cattle, Tom found yet another mutilated animal. The black Simmental cow was lying near some bushes. He had been worried because he had seen several mysterious lights flying low among his cattle the previous night. The bright yellow headlamps that flew silently over the property had become commonplace and created yet more stress and fear for his family. As Tom rode to the animal, his worst fears were realized. The 4-year-old cow's reproductive organs and rear end had been carved out. He dismounted from the horse, and Tom felt a cold anger welling up inside him. An unknown trespasser was violating the sanctity of private property and of his family's well-being. He was determined to catch whoever it was and make him pay. Okay, here's one on an orb that they see. Tom and Ellen stood outside their homestead looking west. It was an evening in the summer. The summer was coming, and the chill of the winter of the year was no longer apparent. Both were stressed. They had watched the cattle grazing several hundred yards away in a lush pasture just to the south. 3 of their horses munched on grass, and Tom could tell there was something about them that were making them restless. Tom was the first to see it. He picked up and noticed. He seemed to pick up and quickly notice things out of place. He stiffened. It was a blue orb that was flying in the tree line next to the horses. He felt Ellen beside him, tensing up as she saw it. The intense blue light cast by the object was easily visible as it flew through the trees. They both watched it, and it emerged from the tree line slowly and flew around the head of one of the horses. The horses noticed it too, and impatiently shook its head as if trying to rid itself from a swarm of flies. The darting orb was close enough to illuminate the animal in an eerie bright blue glow. Tom was puzzled by the fact that the horse never registered alarm. Normally the blue orbs cause extreme stress in animals. Suddenly the blue object darted away from the horses and at astonishing speed moved closer to the Gormans. It stopped abruptly in midair 15 feet above the ground and hovered silently about 20 feet from them. This was easily the best view they had ever seen of these elusive blue orbs. They watched, fascinated by the object as it hung in the air, apparently defying the laws of gravity. The exterior of the orb was clear, hard and shell-like, but not unlike glass. It was maybe 2 or 3 times the size of a baseball, yet inside the glass-like interior moved a swirling, intensely blue substance. It seemed to Tom like a liquid beginning to boil. It was nearly bubbling, candlescent blue fluid. He could hear a faint cracking sound from the object like static electricity. As Tom watched the amazing spectacle, the hair on the back of his head rose. He could feel a wave of naked fear washing over him. He felt paralyzed, in the deepest, most visceral fear he had ever known. It was overwhelming, overpowering. Wild animals had trapped Tom, and he had been close to death, but he had never felt anything like the intensity of terror that he's feeling now. He knew Ellen was feeling the same because she had begun to hyperventilate. She gasped deeply in her body and began to shake. Tom felt like he was going to have a seizure. Okay, so here's an instance where Tom loses all 3 of his dogs. Okay. Dogs were barking. I'm not going to read this one because it's kind of long, so I'm just going to kind of go through it. So his dogs are barking. The object is another blue orb. All right. The dogs are barking. The object is 100 yards away and has changed directions and is moving parallel to Tom's position. Without really thinking, I let my dogs loose, and I usually keep them inside when those things are flying around. His 3 dogs took off at top speed in the direction of the blue orb. It didn't seem to react to their presence until the animals got much nearer. Then it dipped down and descended until it was only a few feet off the ground. The 3 dogs began to leap at the object, and they were snarling and their jaws were snapping. Each time the animals leaped at the orb, it skillfully moved out of the way and the jaws missing it sometimes by inches. The strange ritual began to play itself out. It was apparent that the dogs were becoming incensed with this strange object that danced out of the way at the last moment, but then dipped down again so they could lunge at it again. The intense blue orb seemed to deliberately be teasing and enraging the dogs. Tom was getting uneasy as the game of catch moved in the direction to a thick grove of trees 100 yards to the south. It seemed to be steering the dogs towards that place. A couple of minutes later, the orb dipped to the ground and in almost lugubrious speed flew slowly among the trees, the snarling dogs eager to give chase. Then I heard the sounds that chilled me to the bone. The unmistakable fear-filled yelps of the dogs in mortal agony, and then utter silence. Nothing moved. 3 large circles. He goes there to find out what happened, and the smell of burnt flesh greeted my nostrils as I dipped my head beneath the low branches. 10 yards inside the grove of trees, tears filled my eyes. 3 large circles, brown, dried-out grass were in the middle of the clearing. At the center of each one of the shriveled vegetation lay a greasy mess. The stink to incinerated dogs was awful. Now I understood why the weird arrangement of deadbolts both on the inside and the outside of the doors of the ranch when I bought the house. Guys, that's not the half of it. I mean, he talks about seeing Bigfoot, portals open up with creatures coming through them. Talks about one instance where they were watching a ridgeline and a yellow orb appears, but then it opens a portal and a creature comes through it. It ends up disappearing before they see it up close or anything like that, but all kinds of stuff in here. It just really makes you think just what these things are, you know, as far as evil, just horrendous evil. And that's the thing. It's all wickedness. It's all subject to the power of Jesus Christ. It's all subject to his name. So what I want to do is play a video that came out a long time ago that obviously the Holy Spirit struck with me. And it's a guy named Ed Amos who gets a message from the Lord about orbs and what they are. And I'm going to close with that. And so God bless you guys and take care.
God bless you and greetings to you in the wonderful name of our living Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, Yahushua HaMashiach, and God our Father, Yahuwah Elohim. I received this message on 4/9. I was outside and I looked up and saw a bright circular light in the distance. And this is the part I'm trying to explain. It was a bright circular light, but it was coming out of a bright circular light. Now, whether that bright circular light was the sun or the moon or some other object in the sky, I'm not sure, but it was very bright. It was larger than this object. So it was like an object coming out of a bright circular light coming out of a bright circular light. The bright circular light in the distance, and it began to come towards me. It was as bright as the sun, and it moved across the sky and began its descent towards me. Suddenly it was upon me, and I noticed it appeared to be made of some sort of metal as it came towards me and stayed as it came right next to me. It made no apparent sound and appeared to be 20 to 30 feet in diameter, but I couldn't be sure of the exact size. Then the word of the Lord came to me and said, "Son of man, what do you see?" And I replied, "I'm not real sure, Lord." But it appeared to be some sort of bright glowing orb, but I'm not used to seeing them except on YouTube. And those seem to be smaller. Then he says, "These orbs are containers, ships you might call them, used by my enemy and sometimes me. If you see one in real life, don't approach it or don't try to communicate with it unless I tell you to. They can be very dangerous. Some have fallen ones inside, and others are drones. In any case, stay away from them if at all possible. If they seem to follow you or harass you, rebuke it out loud in Jesus' name, Yahushua's name, until it flees from you. You can also pray to me and ask for me to send my warrior angels to come and assist you in getting rid of them from your presence. As things continue to accelerate, warn my people to not allow their natural curiosity to get the best of them. Do not try to communicate or channel with these orbs. I forbid it, says the Lord, unless I direct you to. They come in all sizes, colors, shapes. Avoid them all unless directed by me. The enemy will use these orbs to capture, abduct, and take you away. This is not the rapture of the church.
That's not a light.
What the hell is that?
That's like one of those little orbs.
As I'm looking at it, I think maybe it's the other team or a car light or some type of light off in the distance. But as Bobo and I are standing there, we can see it's an orb of light. It's not an animal. It's a diffused ball of light moving slowly towards the ground.
So we're seeing these little orbs, these little glowing balls of light floating through the woods. I don't know what they are, I don't know what they're doing, but they're here and they're not showing up on camera. Some people associated with UFOs, some people associated with ghosts, some people associated with demons, some people with Bigfoots. I'm not sure what the connection with any of those are. I just know they're real, and I'm seeing them right now tonight.
God bless you guys. That last part, it was from my Sasquatch video, so, take it for what it's worth, God bless.